Well, good morning again. We are in the final segment of our series, Freedom from Yesterdays. We're going to be covering Ruth chapter 4. We've covered the first 3 chapters already. So, Ruth, where do we find Ruth? Old Testament or New Testament? Old Testament, all right. And so this is a story of a family that, again, tries to, has to go through a lot of transitions in life, experiences death in life, new beginnings, famines, new homes, new marriages, lots of things that are happening. And what we see is through this family's journey, we see God's love being enacted in the actions and relationships and steps that they take on a daily basis. So as we get ready to get into today's scripture, definitely want to say hello to some of our folks who watch on live stream all the time, the Inyards and Kearns, Mary Ann Phillips. Good morning to you guys. Thank you for watching. Ruth chapter 4. No sooner had Boaz, who's Boaz? So Boaz is the sort of next of kin, the one who is helping Ruth and Naomi in their move back to Bethlehem. He's providing them food, providing them a place for them to harvest in the field. And since he's kind of next of kin, he's going to marry Ruth. Except there's somebody that, according to the laws and traditions back then, is a little bit closer relative. And so they have to give this guy a chance to take the land and marry Ruth first. So no sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin of whom Boaz had spoken came passing by. So this next of kin is not even given a name in the whole story. The gate is, in all the ancient Israel towns, near the gate was sort of like a courtyard full of benches, and this was sort of like a court. It's where business transactions were held and disputes were settled, because you'd have your town elders would get near there and they would listen to what was going on. So Boaz said, "Come over, friend, sit down." And he went over and sat down. And then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And then he said to the next of kin, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech." So remember, Elimelech had died shortly after he and his wife Naomi and their sons moved from Bethlehem to the region of Moab. So selling a parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. And so I thought I would tell you of it and say, "Buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me so that I may know, for there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you." So he said, "I will redeem it." And throughout the book of Ruth, redemption is one of the main themes that we're focusing on. How are we redeemed in different areas of our lives by trusting in God? What does that redemption look like? And so here, they're talking about land that was once Elimelech's and Naomi's and now needs to be redeemed, given back to Naomi. So he says, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz said, "Okay, well, the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite. Oh, by the way, you're also getting this foreigner, Ruth, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on inheritance." At this, the next of kin said, "I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one took off a sandal, shoe, and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, "Acquire it for yourself," he took off his sandal. So what we know here is a lot of the traditions and rules and how things were passed around and down, given, we've lost a lot of that. So there are some transactional issues in all we just read that we really can't explain fully. And even when this was written, The tradition of taking off the sandal as to attest to the agreement that they had just made was already forgotten. That's why the writer is putting this in here. Verse 9, so Boaz said to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion, that's his dead son, and to Mahlon, it's his other dead son. Remember, the two sons died after their father did when they went to Moab. And that's one of the reasons why Naomi changed her name from Naomi, meaning pleasant, to Mara, meaning bitter. She went there and everything went wrong. I've also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses. And then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, we are witnesses. And so Boaz, whose name means pillar of strength, is acting as, in Hebrew, the Goel, or the Redeemer. And what's happening here, again, as we've talked about over the last several weeks, we have two things happening. The individual lives of the people, but also we are creating a genealogy for King David to be born. And so by having Ruth and Boaz come together, Ruth will, kind of spoiler alert here, have a child, which is credited to Naomi, which creates the bloodline. It's confusing. I can't explain all of it accurate enough. You have to write a big book in order to do so, but just trust me on that. And we're going to go to some bigger things that apply to us today. Now, here comes a three-part blessing. The people there said, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house, Ruth, like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the house of Israel. So in other words, may you be fruitful and multiply a lot. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. Again, creating the genealogy. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house, and it's not necessarily the house, but like your family, your genealogy, be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. All of this is, like sometimes when you read the Old Testament, you just get name upon name upon name. This is kind of one of those sections, but it's creating a line for King David to be born. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when they came together, the Lord made her to conceive, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And he shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. And again, back then, Naomi could be credited with the son through her daughter-in-law. And so here, again, what we're having is, in the story, Naomi, who once had husband and 2 sons, they all die, they lose everything, they come back, there's been a restoration. There's been a redemption. So then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse, the father of David. And I'm going to skip the last few verses there because I get into a bunch of names. But in essence, Obed becomes the father of Jesse, Jesse of David, who becomes King David. So again, what we see here in this series is freedom from yesterdays. And when we started this, I challenged you, what do you think about in your, what are the yesterdays in your life that have baggage that you carry around, the yesterdays that have formed who you are today? Some of those good, and some are, in our yesterdays, things that, they challenge us, and they can make us sad. They can impact how we are in relationship with people today. And even through this, I said, we're not going to solve all of our yesterdays, but there's going to be some that you think about, and how do we gain freedom from them? Meaning, how can we stop giving them life in today's present age? What are we carrying that through the love of God, what Jesus Christ has done through us, through our learning and following the ways and words of Jesus, can bring us new life today? Because Jesus said in John 10:10, I've come that you may have life and have it abundantly. Now, just because we have things that impact us from yesterday, and we all have things that we know we'll never forget, but how do we live today in a freedom that says, there's something more for me? I can be restored. So what does this freedom look like? As followers, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we have a choice on receiving freedom by the forgiveness, mercy, grace, and hospitality we show not only to others, but to ourselves. Freedom from yesterday is, again, our lived experiences defines who we are. The knowledge of past experiences that we carry in today that are unhealthy. Cycles of behavior that we've seen from our grandparents, our parents, and now you're replicating them. And then when you look at your kids, they're like, oh my, they're just like me. Or they're just like your spouse, depending on how they are acting, right? So these lived experiences can sometimes create this negative baggage. Our yesterdays, compared to today, our yesterdays cannot be changed. Our yesterdays have consequences. Today's actions can have consequences, but sometimes we have to live in these consequences. So this isn't about easily or miraculously undoing the past. Some of this freedom that we've talked about is going to be a journey, and just you starting that journey, acknowledging what is happening, is worthy of praise and is something that is healthy for you in the long term. Our yesterday is a thing. It's a memory. It has life because of the way we think about it, what we associate with it. So this yesterday, you're creating the story that you retell about that event or events in your past. So if today you're able to tell a different story, to realize now that I've been forgiven, or now that I have forgiven another, or now that I've accepted grace, received grace, realize that God has been trying to give me grace for a while, I can now move on. You change the story, you change the narrative of this thing, of this yesterday that you have been dragging around. And when we look at our yesterdays compared to tomorrow, we're hoping that our future self will be pleased with the decisions that you make today. And so again, we make daily decisions that impact what tomorrow will be. So in this book of Ruth, studying in the Old Testament, again, it adds to our biblical literacy. You'll be experts on the book of Ruth, and it reveals to us through their struggles. Again, it's not a sugar-coated story. Naomi herself is not one that we would emulate. She was never, we never are told that she prays. We're never told that she forgives anyone nor asks anybody for forgiveness. She was rude to Ruth, doesn't talk to her. But there's something in this story which we can gloss over. It's that in this story, all of the characters that we've talked about each day just live their life the best way they know how, but they lived it in a way that they felt was the most faithful way that they could. So it didn't mean that their life went well. Ruth still had to go out and glean in the fields for months and months and months. Naomi had the benefits of all the work that Ruth did. But what we see in the story is Naomi influenced Ruth, and Ruth influenced Naomi. So in other words, once Naomi's husband had died and the sons had died, and she said, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem because now there's food there, and I'm going to leave the land of Moab. Naomi said to Ruth and to her other daughter-in-law, you guys go back here. You get your security. You stay. But Ruth's like, no, I'm going to go with you. Your people shall be my people. Your land shall be my land. Your God shall be my God. Ruth would have only done that if she saw something in Naomi that she saw was truthful, faithful, something worth wanting to be around. So when we look at redemption, again, redemption is a process by which people, property, and prestige are restored to a family or restored to a person who has lost them through poverty or through violence or some other cause. So again, you're getting something back. It's almost the legal sense. But redemption and to be redeemed is also to rescue or to save or to liberate people from a danger or from distress or from oppression. We know throughout the Old Testament, and what Jesus echoes is that God is the redeemer of the widower and the poor. So we see a story of human love enacting divine love, God's faithful, in Hebrew, hesed, loyal love. So some of the things that we've talked about here, in looking back, I was like, what's the conclusion of this message? Because sometimes I think we wait for some quick fix, some answer. I'll find that one thing that's going to really make a difference. And that can happen. But what this story tells us about the way God operates in the world, about the way we live in this world, is that there's seldom a quick fix. If it is, it's probably not long-term healthy. Now, I will say that there are two things that we can do on a daily basis that will dramatically help your life, turn your life, bring peace and love into your life. Forgiveness. Whether you are seeking forgiveness or giving forgiveness, and grace. Whether you accept the grace of God into your life to know that you're forgiven, that it's okay, that your past doesn't have to define who you are today, or whether you give grace to somebody else. Giving grace to somebody else, like, yeah, you really messed that up, but I'm going to extend a grace to you. Those things are definitely quick fixes. Quick fixes in the sense of it's a one word, I'm going to do this, not going to make everything better, but it's going to start you quickly on the right path. But what we see in the story of Ruth is a daily way of living life, living faithfully, trying to figure it out. What does it mean? Naomi knew, based on her faith and knowledge of God and love of God, that the best thing she could do when her two sons died was to find security for her daughter-in-laws. So in chapter 1, she says, it's better you go back to your hometown to find security so you can remarry. And then in chapter 3, when Naomi is seeing that Boaz and Ruth sort of have an interest in each other and that Boaz needs to be the redeemer by being next of kin, she said, I'm going to help secure you, the security you need for your future, knowing that also Ruth's security would be her security. So she acts faithfully. There's no guarantee. There's no promise that it was going to go right or go well, because then what did Naomi have to tell Ruth? Go do what you're supposed to do, present yourself, and then Boaz like, hey, I'm going to go try to work this out. But they didn't know if it was going to happen. And they had to wait. And so Naomi tells Ruth, wait. And we don't like to wait. But what we see here are lessons that we have to live daily, live faithfully. We also have to wait. That allows God time to act, that allows God to work with us. What we also see in the story is that redemption comes from areas in which we don't expect. Ruth was a foreigner, a Moabite, looked down upon, not even second class, third class, nothing to do with. Yet God uses her to continue the genealogy and bring about King David. God uses her to help bring about redemption for Naomi. This needs to speak to us daily in how we view the world, how we view others, what is happening out there. Where will God bring people and resources into our life in a way in which we don't expect, especially from people we don't expect? An easy analogy is, if you want to run a marathon, is anybody training for Columbus Marathon? Does anybody run a lot in here? I think we have some runners in here, right? Well, you just don't go out and decide, I'm going to run 20 miles today. You go out and you run and run and run some more every day, building up to it. So the same way that this family, because there was faith in God, but more importantly, because God is faithful to us, that they were able to make decisions that they hoped would bring about redemption, resolution, restoration of their life. And then times it had to wait. But if they weren't practicing their faith, what would happen? Surely the death, moving home, transitioning, losing everything, would knock most of us off kilter, wouldn't it? But here what we learn is, again, I can remember upon the rock on which I stand. I can remember of my faith in Jesus Christ as God who loves me, which allows me to make a decision each day. Sometimes those decisions work out well, sometimes they don't. But again, as we go through here, as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus Christ, we do not preach a prosperity gospel. I'm not going to tell you everything is going to turn out right. Everything turns out well in this book in the Old Testament. Naomi is redeemed, but I'm pretty sure Naomi in the first place would have preferred that her husband and sons not die, right? I'm pretty sure Ruth would have wanted her first husband to live. I'm pretty sure they would not have wanted to move and face ridicule and teasing from other people. We see that life is going to happen to us, and sometimes it's going to be pretty upsetting. But do we have faith? Do we have the ability to, in those tough times, to realize who is your ground? Who's your ground of being? What gives you the strength? What allows you to say, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. What allows you to stand there and look and see the storm swirling around, even when you can't see the way out and when you don't know the path, but I can stand there because I know my faith rests in God, who loves me. Now, I know I'm not going to get out of this life alive, right? At some point, I'll get older. At some point, I may get sick. And at some point, I will die. Now, I'd like for that to be peaceful, right? But we know things are going to happen. And so when it does happen, can I, in the midst of all of that happening, stand there with a firm understanding and foundation that even though I am being shaken, that God is still with me. Even though I cannot see the way out, that God on a daily basis is saying, do this today. When Jesus called to us, he says, don't be anxious about tomorrow. Don't worry about what is going to be happening. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, nor what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? He said in the Gospel of John, let not your hearts be troubled, believe in God, believe also in me. And so when I can remember what is being said, what Jesus is doing, I can remember my training, the self-discipline, the Sundays after Sundays of listening to stories and singing praises or whatever it may be, so that when God brings resources or people into my life, I can be aware of the presence of God. But if you're not trying daily to live faithfully, to take the steps that you believe are right, we get out of practice or undisciplined and can miss what God is trying to do in our life. And God's not going to lay everything out there for you. Our prayer is, when we say the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. God gives you the manna, the bread, the life that you need for that day. If you were told what's going to happen for the next few years, you'd mess it up. God knows what you need right now. God is in the present. The past is done. Nothing's guaranteed in the future. Being aware of what God is doing in your life. Because those times come, and for many of you, they've been there in your past, in your yesterdays. And you're here because you had something to stand on. You're here because God brought somebody into your life that says, just take a breath. Just be here today. And I'll be here tomorrow. One step at a time. One step at a time. Willing to let go of the control and to trust in something. Willing to receive God's grace and forgiveness and mercy in your life. If you believe in God, do you trust in God? Do you trust in God for the times that are happening today and for the times that are yet to happen? Amen.